good to be here today. Yes, so I was born into a food family, and what that means is my dad's parents were Russian refugees. They were put on a boat just before World War II to Africa. They didn't know each other, so it was an arranged marriage, and they were put on this boat to avoid conscription, to avoid going and fighting a war. And they didn't know how to speak English. They didn't know where Africa was. And they landed in this country and were sent off to relatives, but all they knew how to do was bake. So they came from the baking, sort of baking background. Ended up in Benoni, seems to be the place, and became very well-known bakers. They had a big deli. And I was brought up with that kind of way. A lot of us can relate. Food is part of celebration, it's part of culture. It is, given to you when you're sick. Food is given to you when you're naughty. It's given to you when you're good. And if you're not eating, something's wrong with you. On my mom's side, her family was French. Her dad imported champagne and caviar and distributed it through Africa. So we were also brought up with wine from a very young age. This was never a taboo. And on the other side of this seemingly idealistic or incredible culinary sort of saturation we were brought up with, my mom had an eating disorder. She was bulimic. And what happens with children is we don't listen to our parents, we mirror our parents, we take on their behavior. And I was an athlete, and because I took on my mom's sort of way of seeing the world, so there's this contradictory relationship with food, and I developed an eating disorder as well. The first time I went to a dietitian, I was 10 years old. I was never an overweight child, I just thought I was. And I realized very early on that something was inherently wrong with the dieting industry. I test-driven every diet. I could go from 45 kilos to 80 kilos within 6 weeks very, very easily. I knew how to manipulate things. And over the years, I became really ill. So when you fiddle with food and you fiddle with your biochemistry, you get sick. And many people who have been on diets, who know exactly what I'm talking about, will know that something is going to give. And it's usually your thyroid, your brain, your hormones. Everything eventually caves. And I remember sitting one day in front of a very well-known endocrinologist, which is a hormone doctor, and I said to him, there's a magic pill out there, I know there is, and you're not giving it to me, and I'm not leaving until you give me a prescription for the magic pill that's going to make all my problems go away. And he said to me, I can give you anything you want, you just name it, I'll write your prescription, but until you change your mind, nothing's going to change. And it's not what I wanted to hear, but it's what I needed to hear. And I thought, well, I hate being told no. And if you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to take it on as a personal challenge. And the next time I see you, things are going to be different. And I gave up at the time I had an ad agency, I was in media. I'd always been in the publishing and advertising industry, which was extremely stressful. And I remember walking into my office that day and taking my G5 Mac, unplugging it and telling my partner, the business is yours, I'm going to study nutrition. So I started off with dietetics. I went and studied dietetics. That lasted about maybe 3 months, and I realized I was just rehashing everything that I already knew, and it didn't work, and I was incredibly frustrated. Eventually found a clinical nutrition degree, and from there I went and studied something called functional nutrition. And functional nutrition is understanding the upstream cause of disease. So it's understanding who's the person behind the disease. So when you go to your doctor, they will see you as the person with the flu or the person with the hypothyroid. But from a functional nutrition point of view, we see you as a human being who's having an issue with something, usually more than one thing in their life, which needs nurturing. We need to understand what the cause is, not just the cure. And from there, I applied what I knew, and I lost, it was about 15 kilos of fat within 12 weeks. And people kept coming up to me and saying, what did you do? What diet are you on? What pill are you taking? Where's your doctor? Can I get one as well? And for the first time, in fact, the funniest part was my dad, who's a feeder, thought I had HIV. I'd lost so much weight. I put on muscle, so I'd lost 15 kilos of fat, and I'd added about 7 kilos of muscle. And he said to my mom, please get her tested, something's wrong. And this was the first time in my life I'd done as well, and I'd done it healthily. So that was the greatest irony. And people came up to me and said, well, give us the recipe. And the recipe really was real food. I, for the first time in my life, realized that I needed to nurture myself with real food. And I ate like a horse. I ate 6 times a day. I ate everything. And as I learned to nurture myself with unprocessed real food, everything came right. Everything sorted itself out, and people didn't believe me. So I was invited to do a talk at Sassel, and then a talk at Nestle, which evolved my business, Reinvent Health, into an executive and corporate healthcare company. And from there, I started seeing private patients. Then I was invited to 702 in Cape Talk, and I've been doing radio for about 9 years, 10 years now, which became a couple of stints on Espresso, which became 16 seasons on DSTV's Real Health. And during lockdown, I decided there's nothing else to do, I'm going to write a book. And I decided Penguin was going to be the publisher as well. And yeah, here we are with a book called Thrive. This was an incredible journey. And a manifestation of everything I learned over the last 16 years. So yeah, I've been doing this for 16, almost 17 years. And what I really wanted to put through with this book was that diets don't work, as most of us know. But why don't they work? And they're not sustainable. I think that's probably the most obvious reason, and most of us know you can't live on a diet. But you know, the world has become so distorted. People are very quick to go and jump into the latest fad that they're seeing on social media. We don't realize that where we came from 30, 40 years ago is really how we should be eating nowadays. And somewhere along the line, the picture and the message has become so distorted. So the whole point of this book is to get people to give up dieting, ironically. And I know I'm a nutritionist, and I know we talk weight loss and health all the time, but the really important message here is to go back to eating real food as nature intended. And if we are using real ingredients, and we're being really fussy about the quality of the foods that we're eating, we'll be well. So I know that most of you are really fussy about the ingredients you would be using in your dishes because you want your customer or your boss to have a really good experience of the food that you're producing. But what do you put in your mouth? Are you as fussy with what you eat? Or are you happy to just, go to the takeout and eat whatever? Let me tell you, food is information, and you really are what you eat, okay? So every cell in your body is an expression of the ingredients that you're putting into your system. Your brain is going to become what you eat, okay? And that's quite a concept to get your head around, because we don't think of it that way. We think of ourselves as a tube from north to south, and it's going to fill us up, it's going to make us feel good, it's going to give us energy, it's going to, just get us through the day. And you don't feel this when you're young, trust me. When you're in your 20s, you have very little concept of how food becomes you. But as you get a little bit older, you start realizing the impact of the food you're eating. And the health industry is, we all know, it's growing at an enormous rate. Customers are demanding more from restaurants, they're demanding more from retail, and they should be, because the only way we can change this industry is by expecting better, is asking for better. And you're all sitting in an incredibly powerful position where you can demand better from your suppliers. Less chemicals, smaller carbon footprint, more local food. And one of my greatest passions, and why I really believe dieting doesn't work, is because it's not inclusive. And it's anti-culture, it's anti-social, it's anti-everything, but yet we are so obsessed with what the next diet is. So one of my greatest obsessions at the moment is bringing in and creating awareness around traditional and heritage foods. And we're sitting in, and no one talks about this, we are sitting in probably one of those prolific blue zones in the world. Mark Sisson talks about the blue zones in Scandinavia, in Japan, in Italy, and we all think all the healthiest stuff comes from those countries. And yes, it does, but it's here as well. But no one really talks about the value that we have sitting right here in our own country. And if we're going to make health, not dieting, but health, something that is part of us and part of what we present to the world. It's really, really important to embrace this. And you know, the olives and the olive oil are a prime example of what we've got here. Everyone's Greek olive oil, Italian olive oil. That's just been sitting on a boat in a container for 6 months before we get hold of it. And we've got the most incredible resources right here at a fraction of the cost because we don't have to pay import duties. So it's about just changing your mind about the foods you're eating to make a huge impact. What I'd really like to give you as just some food for thought is, what are you doing for yourself, for your energy, for your own state of mind? 1 in 2 people sitting in this audience have a gut issue. So you've either got some kind of IBS, indigestion, bloating, constipation, diarrhea. These are not the kind of the words we want to use in the food context, but this is a problem. This is a big problem. 1 in 2 people suffer from migraines. This is hormonal, and this is directly connected to the foods we're eating. 2 out of 3 people have subclinical dehydration, okay? We're not taking care of ourselves. And this is going to play out in our moods, anxiety, depression. This is just becoming an epidemic in itself, and this is directly connected to the foods we're eating. So, what can you do? Are there any questions before we continue? Anything at all about food? Anything at all about nutrition, should I say? Absolutely any question.
How do you make this more available for those who aren't as privileged as us that get to sit in a hall at a fancy hotel and listen to you about it? Like, how do you target people in shacks and in towns that don't have that access?
That's an absolutely beautiful question. So, over the years, I've been very privileged to be able to speak to people exactly like that. Factory floor workers, people who don't make, they make minimum wage. And this is where reformatting or remapping our experience of traditional and heritage foods really can play a huge role. So, you know, the chicken running around Kailicha is a healthier chicken than the Woolworths chicken. Why? Because it's not fed rubbish, it's not given canola oil. Have you ever had an egg that smells of fish? Those are chickens that are fed canola seed, chicken feed. And what happens is that canola ferments in the chicken's gut and it leaches out into every cell and the entire digestive system of that chicken. Okay? So your chicken that's running around in the sand eating bugs and slugs is your healthier bird, and that's what we should be eating. And if we can start communicating this to people and empowering people at whatever level, and they can take it back to their communities, that's how we help these people. It's also really important to remember that you don't have to do everything right. You don't have to have a ton of money. You don't have to have an education. You don't have to get all the points right. But if you can get some clean water, get some protein in almost every meal, and start eliminating the processed food, and that's the tricky part, because processed food's really cheap and really accessible, then you're going to start feeling better. The other easy way to get this going is through communities. So when people are taught to grow food as a community, and each person in that community can grow something different and start sharing, that's how we start getting the message across. But there need to be champions in those communities who can put the message over to people where it doesn't sound like it's patronizing or unattainable. And most of the health changes we can all make are cost us absolutely nothing. Okay, does that answer? Okay, other questions? Okay, so my best advice for all of us sitting here, and that includes everyone who's not students, is to put on your own oxygen mask first. Okay, we can't help anybody else until we help ourselves. That's absolutely key. We've all heard this when you get onto an airplane. You cannot help the next person until you start looking after yourself. Okay, you won't have the resources to help anybody else until you start looking after your own health. Really critically important. So I want to leave you with my favorite recipe. There's only 3 ingredients in this recipe, and there's equal parts of everything. And those are passion, meaning, and purpose. Okay? Nothing gets done without passion. I could never have got to where where I've come in the last couple of years and been able to touch the lives of so many people all over the world without a serious passion for what I do. The most rewarding thing I do is help people to change their own lives. So just by, one or two, you never know who you're going to be touching. And if you've got serious passion behind what you do, no matter what it is, it's going to feed you, it's going to energize you. Meaning is also a key ingredient in this recipe. And I don't believe that we can be happy without having some kind of meaning in our lives. Most of us have chosen this career because it means a lot, because there's something that drives you. And there's nothing worse than doing something every day that drains the life out of you. So if there's meaning behind what you're doing, you're going to love what you do. And purpose, you can't have the first two without having purpose. So if your life is purpose-driven and you know why you're doing what you're doing, they say you'll never work a day in your life. So thank you very, very much again for this opportunity. And